We'll need Emily Carter's signature to proceed. That was the sentence that finally made my stepmother stop talking. Just seconds earlier, Diane Carter had been leaning forward in that polished conference room, her voice calm, confident, controlled, the same way it had always been when she believed she was in charge of everything. The kind of control that never needed to be loud, the kind that assumed agreement before anyone else even spoke. But the moment the attorney said my name, something shifted. It was subtle at first. A pause, a flicker, the smallest break in the rhythm she had perfected over years. Then her fingers tightened around the edge of the folder in front of her, just slightly, just enough that anyone paying attention would notice. I noticed. I always did. Because I had spent most of my life watching her, learning her tells, learning exactly how power looked on her, and more importantly, how it looked when it started to slip. If you've ever been told you don't belong in your own family, you already know that kind of silence. It stays with you. It shapes the way you listen, the way you notice things other people miss. And if this story feels familiar, if you've ever had to build something for yourself because no one else would take a second to like and subscribe, not for me, for you. For every version of you that kept going anyway, Diane turned her head slowly. Her eyes finding mine across the table like she had just realized I was actually there. Not in the abstract way she used to acknowledge me, not as background, not as the extra person in the room, but as a variable she hadn't accounted for. There must be some mistake, she said. Her tone still measured, still controlled, but thinner now, like glass stretched too far. The attorney didn't react. He simply adjusted his glasses, flipped one page then another. Paperwork. Clean. Precise. Final. No mistake, he said. The property transfer cannot be completed without Miss Carter's authorization. Miss Carter, not stepdaughter, not family, just a name on a document. Funny how that works. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat there with my hands folded neatly in my lap, the same way I used to sit at that long dining table years ago, back when I had learned that speaking didn't change anything. Back when I learned that silence carried further. Across from me, my father shifted in his chair. Robert Carter, still quiet, still watching, still saying nothing. Some things never change. Diane let out a small breath, almost a laugh, like she was trying to recover control of a conversation that had already moved past her. Emily, she said, turning fully toward me now, her voice softening in a way that would have sounded warm to anyone who didn't know better. We just need your signature so we can finalize everything. It's a simple formality, a formality. I almost smiled. Because years ago, in a house with polished floors and perfectly set dinner tables, she had looked me straight in the eye and said something else. Something much simpler, something much colder. You're not family. I said nothing then. And I said nothing now. But this time, the silence meant something very different. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh paper, the kind of place designed to make everything feel official, controlled, unquestionable, and for a long time that kind of environment used to intimidate me, but not anymore. Not since I learned that control does not come from the room, it comes from what you hold inside it, and right now what they needed was sitting quietly in my hands, even if I had not lifted them yet, even if I had not said a single word, because silence, when you understand it, is not empty, it is deliberate. And Diane knew that I could see it in the way she adjusted her posture just slightly straighter, the way her smile held, but did not quite reach her eyes. She was recalculating. I recognized that, look, I had seen it across kitchen counters and dining tables for years, back when I was still trying to understand my place in a house that never quite felt like mine. Back when everything was decided before I even knew there was a decision to be made, and it always came back to the same thing, Chloe first. Always Chloe's schedule, Chloe's plans, Chloe's future, while mine existed. Somewhere off to the side, acknowledged only when it was convenient or when it could be reshaped into something smaller, something easier to dismiss. I remember one night in particular, the table set perfectly, like it always was, white plates aligned. silverware placed with precision, a soft yellow light casting everything in a warm glow that almost made it look like a real family. Almost until Diane spoke her voice, calm, measured, as she explained how Chloe's tuition would require some adjustments, how resources needed to be reallocated. That was the word she used, reallocated, like we were numbers on a spreadsheet instead of people sitting right there. And when I asked quietly, carefully, what that meant for me, she did not hesitate. She did not soften. She simply looked at me with that same composed expression and said, "You are not part of this equation." And when I did not respond, when I just sat there trying to understand how a person could erase someone so cleanly with a single sentence, she added it, the line that stayed, the one that settled into every silence that came after, "You are not family," and no one corrected her, not my father, not Chloe, no one even looked surprised. And that was the moment I understood something that took years to fully accept. I had never been included. Not really, I had only been present, and presence is not the same as belonging. I said nothing that night. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply nodded once, like I had just been given instructions I needed to follow, and I remember the exact sound of the fork against the plate as dinner continued, the quiet clink that filled the space where something else should have been. Something human, something real, but it never came. And eventually, neither did I, not in the same way, because after that I stopped waiting for a place that was never going to be offered. I started paying attention instead to documents, to signatures, to the way ownership is written down and enforced, to the difference between being told you do not belong and proving that something is still yours. And now, years later, sitting across from the same woman who once erased me with a sentence, I could see the shift happening in real time the moment she realized that whatever she thought she controlled had already moved beyond her, and this time I was not the one outside of the equation, she was. There was a time when I believed leaving would be the hardest part, but it was not the hardest part, was staying long enough to understand exactly what I was walking away from. Because when you grow up in a house where everything looks perfect from the outside, it takes longer to admit that nothing inside was ever meant for you. And I stayed just long enough to see the pattern fully, to see how decisions were made, how names appeared and disappeared from conversations, how money moved quietly from one account to another while explanations were dressed up as responsibility. I started noticing documents left open on the kitchen counter, envelopes stacked neatly by the door folders, placed just slightly out of reach, details that most people would ignore, but I did not. Not anymore, because once you realize you are not included, you stop waiting to be told, and you start looking for yourself. And that was when I saw it for the first time, a property document partially covered my father's name, printed clearly at the top, Diane's just beneath it, and then a third line, one I almost missed because it did not belong in the way the others did. My name, Emily Carter, printed in the same formal type, the same ink, the same legal weight. I remember standing there for a second longer than I should have, not touching it, not moving anything, just reading it again to make sure I was not imagining it, because it did not make sense. Nothing about that house had ever included me, not in words, not in decisions, not in anything that mattered, and yet there, it was written down in a place that could not be erased by a sentence at a dinner table. I did not ask about it. I did not bring it up. I simply folded that information away the same way I had learned to fold everything else, quietly, carefully, without drawing attention. And later that week, I made a call, a small one, to a local office, asking a question in a voice that sounded steadier than I felt, confirming something that changed the way I saw everything that came after, because ownership, real ownership, does not rely on who is welcomed at the table. It relies on what is written, what is signed, what is filed. And once I understood that something shifted, not in them, they remained exactly the same, but in me, I stopped trying to negotiate my place in conversations that were never meant to include me. And I started preparing for a different kind of future one where I did not need permission to exist inside a system that had already written my name into it, even if they had not noticed, even if they never intended to. And by the time I finally left that house with one suitcase and a silence that felt heavier than anything I carried, I was not walking away empty. I was walking away informed, and that made all the difference, because information, when it is patient, becomes leverage. And leverage, when it is quiet, waits for the right moment to be seen. The first night after I left, the silence felt different. Not the kind that filled a house where you were expected to stay quiet, but the kind that came with space, with distance, with the absence of someone else's rules pressing down on. Every decision, I remember sitting on the edge of a narrow bed in a rented room that barely fit more than a dresser and a desk, the window facing a parking lot, lit by a flickering street lamp. And for the first time, no one knew where I was. No one asked. And more importantly, no one expected anything from me. It was not freedom in the way people like to describe it. It was something quieter, something more deliberate. It was ownership, even if it was small, even if it was just a room and a door that closed completely. I started working the next morning. Nothing impressive. A front desk position at a small office that handled property records and title transfers, the kind of place most people never think about until they need something verified. Signed or legally confirmed, I did not choose it by accident. I chose it because I understood what it represented, a system that did not rely on who you were to someone else, only on what could be proven, documented, enforced. I watched everything, the way files were organized, the way signatures were compared, the way a single missing authorization could stop an entire transaction. And I learned quickly, faster than anyone expected, because I was not just learning a job. I was learning how power actually worked, not in conversations, not in families, but in records, in ink, in lines that could not be crossed without consequence. Weeks turned into months, months into years, and I moved forward, quietly taking classes at night, studying contracts, understanding clauses, learning how language could bind decisions long after the people who made them forgot the details. I kept copies of everything that mattered, not because I planned to use them right away, but because I knew that information, when it is preserved, does not lose its value. It waits. And every now and then I would think back to that document on the kitchen counter, the one with my name printed where it did not belong, revisit it in my mind, not emotionally, but analytically, asking the same question from different angles. Why was it there? Who put it there? What did it actually mean? And eventually, I found the answer, not in a single moment, but in layers. Through public records, through filings that anyone could request, if they knew what to look for, through signatures that connected people to assets in ways that conversations never revealed. And when the full picture finally came together, it was almost simple, almost predictable. My father had never removed me from that structure, not legally, not completely, even if he had allowed everything else to happen without saying a word. And that detail, that quiet oversight, had been sitting there all along, unnoticed, unchanged, waiting. I did not celebrate when I understood it. I did not react at all, because by then I had learned that the most powerful position is not the one where you act first. It is the one where you can choose when to act at all. And so I continued building a life that did not depend on them growing into someone they no longer recognized, until one day, years later, my phone lit up with a number I had not seen in a long time. And I already knew before I answered that whatever they wanted, it was not going to be simple, because people only remember you when they need something they cannot get without you. The phone rang twice before I answered, not because I was hesitating, but because I already knew who it was, and more importantly, why numbers change over time, but patterns do not. And Diane Carter had never called me without a reason that served her first. I let the third ring almost complete before I picked up just enough to remind myself that I was no longer the one waiting. "Emily," she said, her voice soft, controlled, almost careful. like she was testing the temperature of the conversation before stepping fully into it. And for a moment, if you did not know her, you might have mistaken it for warmth. But I did know her. I knew exactly how that tone was constructed, how it adjusted itself depending on what she needed. And right now, she needed something. It has been a long time. She continued, a slight pause placed deliberately, as if expecting me to fill the silence with something emotional, something forgiving. Something easy. I did not. Yes, I said nothing more because the less you offer, the more the other person reveals. That was something I had learned long after leaving that house. And it worked exactly the same way here. There was another pause, shorter, this time less controlled. Your father and I were hoping you could come by, she said, shifting slightly. There are a few things we need to discuss. Family matters. The word family landed lightly, almost casually, as if it had always belonged there between us, as if it had never been taken away in the first place. I almost smiled, but not because it was amusing, because it was predictable. What kind of matters, I asked, my tone steady, neutral, not giving or anything to work with. She exhaled softly, a quiet sign of recalculation. It is about the house, she said finally. We are making some updates, restructuring a few things, and there is a document that requires your signature. Just a standard. Authorization, standard, simple, formal, the same words people use when they hope you will not ask questions, but I had built an entire life around asking the right ones, which document, I asked. And this time there was a longer pause, long enough to confirm everything I already suspected. Is easier to explain in person, she replied, her voice tightening just slightly, the controls slipping in a way only someone paying close attention would notice. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the city outside my window, the glass reflecting a version of me she had never known, someone who did not need to guess anymore, someone who already understood the structure behind her request. I can meet, I said after a moment, but I will review everything before I sign anything. Silence. Then a quiet, measured response. Of course, she said, but the word did not sound like agreement. It sounded like obligation. Like something she had no choice but to accept. And as the call ended, I placed my phone down slowly, not rushing, not reacting, because this was not unexpected. It was the moment I had been preparing for without ever needing to say it out loud. They had finally reached the part of the system where I was no longer optional, where my name on paper mattered more than their words ever had, and that changed everything, not for me, but for them. I arrived 10 minutes early, not because I was eager, but because I prefer to see a room before I am expected to sit in it. The building was exactly the kind of place Diane would choose: quiet, expensive, understated in a way that signals control without needing to say it out loud. Glass walls, neutral tones, a receptionist who spoke in a voice trained to sound both polite and distant. I gave my name, watched her type it into a system, watched the brief flicker of recognition cross her face before she directed me toward a conference room. At the end of a long hallway, the door was slightly open, and I could already hear Diane's voice inside, low, controlled, explaining something likely rehearsed. I paused for a second before stepping in, not out of hesitation, but to listen, because what people say when they think you are not there yet often matters more than what they say when you are. It is just a formality. She was saying the same phrase she used on the phone, consistent, predictable, and then I stepped into the doorway and everything shifted. She stopped mid-sentence, her posture straightened, and that familiar smile appeared again, polished. Measured, practiced Emily, she said, as if the years in between had been nothing more than a brief pause. My father sat beside her, Robert Carter, exactly as I remembered, quiet, composed, present, but not engaged. He looked at me for a moment, then nodded slightly, not quite a greeting, more like an acknowledgement that I had entered the space. I took the seat across from them without rushing, placing my bag beside the chair, my movements deliberate, controlled, because pace matters. It sets the tone before words ever do. The attorney sat at the head of the table, a man in his 50s, with reading glasses resting low on his nose, a stack of documents neatly aligned in front of him. He looked at me, not with curiosity, but with recognition the kind that comes from reading names on paper before seeing them in person, miss. Carter, he said, and that was enough. That one word, formal, precise, placed me exactly where I needed to be. Not as a daughter, not as anything relational, but as a party to something that required consent. I nodded once, nothing more. Diane leaned forward slightly, her fingers resting lightly on the folder. "We appreciate you coming," she began, her tone carefully balanced between polite and persuasive. "This will not take long. We are simply finalizing a transfer, and there is a clause that requires your authorization." She slid the folder toward me, smooth, controlled, like this was all already decided, like my role was simply to complete what had been set in motion. I did not open it immediately. Instead, I let my hand rest on the edge of the folder for a second, feeling the weight of it, not physically, but structurally. Because documents like this are never just paper. They are decisions, consequences, leverage. I opened it slowly, page by page, not skipping ahead, not rushing, because reading is not about speed. It is about understanding what someone hopes you will miss. And there it was, exactly where I expected it. My name, again, not as an afterthought, not as something incidental, but as a required signature line, tied directly to ownership, not symbolic, not optional, essential. I looked up briefly, meeting Diane's eyes for just a moment, and in that second, I saw it clearly. She knew that I knew, and that was the moment the balance shifted completely, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way it always does when control moves, from assumption to reality. I closed the folder gently, not with hesitation, but with intention, because there is a difference between refusing to act and choosing when to act. And Diane noticed it immediately, her eyes narrowing just slightly, the smallest shift in expression that would have been invisible to anyone who had not spent years studying her. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice still calm, still measured, but now carrying something else beneath it, something sharper, something closer to urgency. I rested my hands on the table, fingers lightly interlaced, a position that looked relaxed but was anything but. "No," I said, my tone, "even there is no problem." And that was the truth, because problems imply uncertainty, and I was not uncertain not. Anymore. The attorney glanced between us, waiting, not intervening, because this was not his moment to speak yet. This was mine. Diane leaned forward slightly, pressing her advantage the way she always did when she thought momentum was still within reach. "Then we can go ahead and finalize," she continued, tapping lightly on the page where my signature line sat, clean, empty, necessary. I followed her gesture with my eyes, not because I needed to see it again, but because I wanted her to understand that I was looking directly at the same thing she was, the same line, the same requirement, the same point of control before I sign anything I said. My voice, steady, unhurried. "I would like clarification on the ownership structure." The words landed differently than anything I had said before. Not emotional, not reactive, precise, deliberate. The kind of language that belongs in rooms like this. The kind that shifts conversations from assumption to documentation. Diane's smile tightened just slightly. "It is all outlined in the documents," she replied, her tone brushing lightly over the question, as if it did not require further attention. But I did not move. I did not respond to the deflection, because ignoring a question is still an answer, just not the one she wanted to give out loud. Turned my gaze to the attorney instead. "I would like it stated clearly," I said, and now the room adjusted. Not dramatically, just enough. The attorney straightened slightly, recognizing the shift in tone, in position, in authority. He adjusted his glasses, flipped to a specific page, and spoke with a kind of clarity that does not leave room for interpretation. "The property is currently held under a shared ownership structure." He began with primary rights requiring authorization from all listed parties, including Miss Emily Carter. He did not rush, he did not soften. He simply stated what was already written, what had always been there. Diane's hand stilled on the table, her fingers no longer tapping, no longer signaling control. And in that moment, the room went quiet in a different way. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of recognition. I nodded once, not because I needed confirmation, but because I wanted it acknowledged. So without my signature, I said, looking directly at Diane, "Now nothing moves forward." There it was. Said out loud, not as an accusation, not as a threat, just as a fact. Clean, simple, final. Diane exhaled slowly. Her posture, still upright, still composed, but no longer effortless. And for the first time since I'd walked into that room, she did not speak immediately, because for once the next move was not hers to make. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted slowly like pressure building in a sealed room, and Diane was the first to move, not dramatically, not visibly, to anyone who did not know her. But I saw it in the way her shoulders adjusted, in the way her fingers pressed flat against the table as if grounding herself in something that no longer felt stable. "Emily," she said again, this time softer, less controlled, the edge of urgency slipping through despite her effort to contain it. "There is no need to make this complicated." Complicated, the word hung there for a second. Familiar because it was always used the same way, to minimize, to redirect, to suggest that asking questions was somehow the problem, not the situation. Itself, I tilted my head slightly, not in defiance, not in challenge, just enough to show that I was listening without accepting. "It is not complicated," I replied, my tone steady, calm, the kind of calm that comes from certainty, not from restraint. "It is very clear," and that was the difference. Clarity removes negotiation. It removes the space where manipulation usually lives. Diane exhaled again, slower this time, her eyes flicking briefly toward my father as if searching for support, for intervention, for anything that might shift the balance back in her favor. But he remained exactly as he had been, silent, still present without participation. And that silence, the same silence that had once worked in her favor, now did nothing for her at all. She turned back to me, her expression tightening just slightly. "We are simply trying to move forward," she said, choosing her words carefully. "This benefits everyone, everyone." Another familiar word, one that used to exclude me without ever saying so. Directly I let it pass, without reacting, because reacting gives something away, and I was not giving anything anymore. Instead, I reached forward and turned one page back in the document, then another, stopping at the section I had already read, twice the clause. She hoped I would skim over the one that redefined ownership after transfer, subtle, precise, irreversible, once signed. I tapped it lightly with my finger, not aggressively, just enough to draw attention to exactly where I wanted it. "This section," I said, looking up at her, "changes the structure." After authorization, the attorney leaned slightly forward, recognizing the reference, his eyes scanning the page before giving a small nod confirmation without commentary. Diane's expression held, but only just. "It is standard," she replied quickly. Too quickly, the timing, revealing more than the words themselves. I did not respond to the explanation because it was not one, it was a dismissal, and dismissals do not hold weight in a room like this documentation does. I leaned back slightly, closing the folder again, not abruptly, not forcefully, just final enough to signal that I had seen everything I needed to see. "Then it should not be a problem to revise it," I said. And that was the moment everything shifted again, not because of volume, not because of emotion, but because I had just moved the conversation from acceptance to condition. Diane knew it. I could see it in the way her composure cracked. For just a second, in the way her next breath came just a fraction too late, because for the first time, she was not controlling the outcome, she was reacting to it. And there is nothing more unfamiliar to someone like her than being placed in a position where agreement is no longer assumed but required. For a moment, no one spoke, not because there was nothing left to say, but because everything that needed to be understood was already sitting there between us, written in black ink on white paper. And for the first time, Diane did not try to interrupt the silence. She did not rush to fill it with another explanation or another carefully chosen phrase. Instead, she simply watched me, her expression no longer polished, no longer controlled in the way it had been at the beginning, but measured in a different way, now like someone trying to calculate an outcome that no longer followed the rules she was used to. "What exactly are you asking for?" she said finally, her voice quieter, more direct, stripped of the layers she usually relied on, and that alone told me everything, because people only ask that question when they realize they are no longer setting the terms. I rested my hands lightly on the closed folder, not gripping it, not guarding it, just present. Because control does not need to look defensive. Nothing complicated, I said, echoing her earlier word with just enough intention to let it settle. Full transparency, revised terms, and equal standing moving forward. I did not raise my voice. Did not emphasize anything. I simply stated it the way the attorney had stated, the ownership clean, structured, undeniable. Diane's lips pressed together briefly, her gaze dropping to the folder before returning to me, and in that small movement, I saw something I had never seen before. Not anger, not frustration, but recognition. The kind that comes too late to change what has already shifted. She nodded once slowly, as if accepting something she had not planned for. We can discuss revisions, she said, and the word discuss sounded different now, not like a formality, but like a requirement, like something that could not be bypassed. My father shifted slightly in his chair, the faint sound of fabric against leather, marking his first movement in minutes. He looked at me again longer this time, as if seeing something he had not allowed himself to see before, but he still said nothing, and that silence no longer worked in his favor. Either I stood, then, not abruptly, not dramatically, just a simple, deliberate movement that signaled the end of the conversation as it had been presented. "Have your attorney send the revised documents," I said, picking up my bag. My voice steady, unchanged. "I will review them when they are ready." Diane opened her mouth slightly, as if to add something, to redirect, to regain a fraction of what had been lost, but no words came because there was nothing left to negotiate in. That moment, only what would come next, and as I walked toward the door, the same door I had entered without hesitation, I paused just long enough to turn back, not to linger, not to reopen anything, but to close it properly. "You were right," I said, meeting her eyes one last time. "I was not family." The words landed quietly, without anger, without emphasis, just truth, and then I added just as calmly, "And I do not sign for people who never considered me one." I did not wait for response. I did not need one, because some answers are not meant to be given in words. They are meant to be lived in the consequences that follow. And as I stepped out into the hallway, the door closing softly behind me, the silence that followed was not empty. It was final. If you have ever been in a situation where your own family made you feel like you did not belong, comment number 1. If you have ever heard a story like this from someone else, comment number 2. And if you never want to find yourself in a position where your worth depends on someone else's recognition, comment number 3. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not to argue your place, but to decide who no longer has the right to define it.